Yes, hello. Cairo Geniza is our class for today. And I have mentioned it a few times, but very briefly. And what is the Cairo Geniza? I have mentioned before that there was let's say, a dumpster of old documents in Cairo from which we have lots and lots and lots of information about the Middle Ages that you wouldn't have had. Interesting enough, today we're going to go back one more time to the Arabic world. So I just to orient yourself, here's the map. The map of the Mediterranean. You see North Africa, you see the Middle East, you see a large chunk of Europe. So you see Spain is on the left, and Portugal. Morocco is already North Africa. You see Italy, you see Turkey, you see hopefully, and the big dot is in Egypt. See, that's where it is. Now I'm zooming in to Egypt, to that dot, to the city of Cairo. Now that river that goes through the image is the Nile, and of course you have Fustat here. See, on the bottom, which is now called Old Cairo because it's older than Cairo itself. Cairo was started was founded later. Of course, Cairo became the capital. Cairo grew and grew and grew, and now Fustat is part of Cairo, just like Brooklyn is part of New York. So that happens with growing cities. But initially, Fustat was just around where the end of this line is, and Cairo is in the other line. We knew that, for instance, Maimonides lived in Fustat, and then he had to go to Cairo to work in the palace, and then he would come back to Fustat. Now you see, if you walk it, it's 2.5 hours walking. So, and he had a little donkey, no, but it doesn't go that much faster, but maybe twice. So it's like that. We know now that his commute was over an hour each way. Now, if we zoom back on Fustat, here's Fustat. Fustat is the blue line, and then the red is the neighborhood. That's the oldest part, and that is where the Jewish community lived. And still now today, now I'm zooming into the red part here. See, this is an older map. That part is where still quite a lot of Christians and are today. No more Jews, but if you see that in the middle, the red part, that is a synagogue. The old central synagogue. There were a few synagogues in Fustat, but that was the big synagogue. Synagogue is still there, and this from the time of Maimonides. Here is an image of the synagogue called the Ben Ezra synagogue. Nothing to do with Ben Ezra, or nothing to do with Ibn Ezra, who you might have heard. Ben Ezra was a family, a rich family that funded this synagogue. Now, a few years ago, this was in shambles. It was just renovated. Now, this is how it looks now. In the past, I used to have an old image, but okay. This is inside the synagogue, so it's really pretty. And now, in one of the side rooms of the synagogue, this is the main room, there's a side room that looks like this, or it used to look like this. And you look up there in the roof, there's a big, like a door, a panel you can take out. And that is where they would deposit old manuscripts, old texts with divine names, the names of God in there. Now, when you have an old text, and there's some of the texts you have in Hebrew, might be just, people wrote Hebrew and all kind of, even they wrote Hebrew letters when they wrote Arabic. So not everything is a holy text, but if you have a whole bunch of papers, you're not going to go through all the text necessarily to see which ones are holy and have to be kept and which not. In practice, actually, people dumped everything with Hebrew letters right there. And even sometimes there were piles, and then there were even things in Arabic letters in between. But there's a lot of papers that were dumped there. And just because not to throw it away in the garbage, it's not respectful. So for hundreds and hundreds of years, people just dumped papers there without ever looking at them. They will just decompose very, very slowly. Now, there's other Genizot, plural of Geniza. Here's one also in Egypt. That's like a place underground. I know a family who used to own a bank. A Jewish family used to own a banks in Cairo, and eventually under Nasser, the banks were all taken away and nationalized. So and their houses were taken and everything. So they left the country with actually nothing. But they did take papers. They had a Geniza in their properties or something, and they took it. And also that turned out to be very valuable. Okay, but we talk about the Cairo Geniza. We're talking about this mostly about this one, and then a little bit other ones. But this is what the Cairo Geniza is, where you have to go on a ladder behind this. Panel. The first person who discovered that there was a Cairo Geniza was a person called Sjimon van Gelder, which is interesting because that's a Dutch name, but I don't think he was Dutch, but maybe or his ancestors were. Now, funny enough, the image on this that I found is Sjimon van Gelder, but it's a different Sjimon van Gelder. So that's a name that occurs, but I just thought it was fun to at least have somebody in this image with that name. Okay, then, and that was in 1700s. In the 1800s, so over 100 years ago, there was a person called Jacob Safir. Look, he looks like an Arab Jew, but he's really, and he lived in Palestine because there wasn't the state of Israel yet. So it was called Palestine by everybody then. And but he was from Eastern European background, but you can see he really assimilated into the culture. But he was a person who traveled around. He was he was a merchant and he was in Cairo, and he was allowed to look in the Geniza at different papers for 2 days, so standing on the ladder. He didn't recognize anything in particular, but he thought it may be very interesting and maybe valuable, is what he wrote. But it stopped there. He didn't study it really in depth. Then, in the late 1800s, these are two sisters here, Agnes and Margaret, both Smith, but they were both married. Agnes Lewis and Margaret Gibson. They were two Scottish twins raised by a very eccentric father, very independent girls. And they both were married, and their husbands died when they were still young. Interesting. Both widows, and they had the time of their life as widows because they traveled and they were adventurous. Well, they spoke more than a dozen languages between the two of them, and they were experts also on Semitic languages. They traveled all over the Middle East. Then they were also allowed to look into the Cairo Geniza, and in 1896, almost 1900, they brought back a few fragments that they were allowed to take. Look, here you have photos of Mrs. Agnes Lewis, who comes out of Faluka, a boat on the Nile, and here is Margaret on the back of a camel. Right, so I can just imagine they're such British ladies. They probably go through the desert speaking Arabic to the Bedouins, and then stop for their exactly at 3:50, 3:15 for their tea break. That's what I imagine. British. So they bring their the fragments that they got to the city of Cambridge, to the renowned Cambridge University. Now, a little bit about Cambridge. What's happening in Cambridge? They had a rabbi, Solomon Schiller Shinesi, who was the first Jewish reader in Cambridge. A reader is what they call a professor there. They call it a reader. And he was a reader in Talmudic and rabbinic literature. Then there's another person there, Professor David Samuel Margoliouth, and his father converted to Christianity, so he was raised Christian, but he had a relationship basically with Middle Eastern and Jewish stuff, but he was extremely eccentric, supposedly, And his specialty was Arabic, but also knew Greek and Hebrew and so many other things. And then this person was Charles Taylor. He was a Hebraist, even though you can see he's a clergyman. And then, oh, I forgot to, yeah. And then we have Solomon Schechter. I think some people might have heard of Solomon Schechter because you have the Solomon Schechter schools and stuff. Ray, you're nodding. Did you go to a Solomon Schechter school?
I didn't, but there's a couple in my area.
Oh yeah, yeah, right. So Solomon Schechter um, was the he worked there. He later would become the founder of conservative Judaism, and also he became the head of the JTS in New York, the Jewish Theological Seminary. So now we connect the Middle East and New York with each other. Um, so these Scottish sisters, Lewis and Gibson, they bring the documents to not to any of the others. They bring it to Solomon Schechter. Maybe they like him. Okay, what was going on right there in Cambridge University? Margoliouth, excuse me, Margoliouth was doing research on the book of Jesus ben Sirach or Sirach. Does anyone here? Did anyone of you hear ever of that? Of Ben Sirach? No, nobody. It's a book in the Bible. Of the a book of the oh these okay book and but it's a book that is in the Greek version of the Bible, the Septuagint, which was meant that it used to be a seen by Jews as a holy book. Uh, we only have it. It's only passed on in Greek because of it was in the Greek version of the Hebrew Bible, which was actually translated by Jews and written and read by Jews for many centuries until Christianity came along and they actually used the Septuagint as their holy book. It was actually the Septuagint, the Greek version of the Hebrew Bible, was seen by Jews as basically divinely inspired too. And now the book of Ben Sira is part of it, but there are some books that later were rejected and not read anymore. However, Ben Sira was very popular once upon a time, and it's actually quoted here and there in the Talmud. So it was actually by some people in the rabbis of Talmud seen as significant enough to quote as a source, as a biblical source. All right. Now, as I said, it was only passed on into Greek, and there was a discussion: is the Greek was it originally written in Greek? Is it really Greek, or is the Greek that we have really a translation of Hebrew? Was it originally written in Hebrew, and what we have is just a translation? Now, Margoliouth was doing research on the book of Jesus Sirach. He wanted to know if it was um, if it was I would try to look at the Greek and see if it's really a tradition, if you can figure out if it was really a translation of the Hebrew. His um, his conclusion was that it was originally Greek and it was never written in Hebrew. It was originally a Greek book. So there was never a Hebrew original. Now, now Schechter gets a fragment from Agnes and Margaret, and he made an amazing discovery. On on May 13, he sends the following note. I've been reading and talking all by myself, which is very egotistic of me. And we're gonna go to Natalie, if that's okay.
Do you want me to read this?
Yes, is that okay?
Yeah, sure. Um, Dear Mrs. Lewis, I think we have reason to congratulate ourselves, for the fragments I took with me represent a piece of the original Hebrew ex exlication.
Yeah,
I
you
can't
have
pronounce.
Ecclesiastes, which is
Mhm.
Kohelet, and this is Ecclesiasticus, which is the book of Sirach, basically, Ben Sirach.
It is the first time that such a thing was discovered. Please do not speak yet about the matter till tomorrow. I will come to you tomorrow about 11 p.m. and talk over the matter with you, how to make the matter known. In hast and great excitement, yours sincerely, S. Schechter.
Yeah, that should be in haste. But so what he found, that the fragment that they brought him was nothing less than uh, the book of Ben Sirach in an originally Hebrew. So the whole the conclusion that Margoliouth said, looking at the Greek, that it looked genuine Greek and not a translation, and it was never Hebrew. He now at that moment finds the original Hebrew from the Cairo Geniza. So they realize there is a potential treasure if we can discover this, if we can find the solution to this, then there might be amazing stuff awaiting in that big, in that Geniza, in that big trove of garbage, which could be a hidden treasure. So he sets off to Egypt, of course not by train yet, but by ship. And in order to get to access to the Geniza, he needs to now get permission from the chief rabbi of Cairo, Rabbi Aaron Raphael ben Shimon. Rabbi ben Shimon, want to continue here, Natalie?
Sure. Rabbi Ben Shimon was not as scholarly inclined and did not see the importance of the research. Schechter now made it his goal to befriend the rabbi. This took much wisdom and patience.
Yeah, all right. Uh-huh.
Schechter smoked many cigarettes and drank innumerable cups of coffee with Ben Shimon.
Oh, that makes me feel like having coffee right now, but I have to wait. But yeah, just wasting time and just befriending him and doing everything that the rabbi likes to do. It's probably smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee, right?
He visited interesting places with him and had to patiently accept that according to the Egyptians, there were many days that were better fit for relaxation than that for any
Oh,
activity.
it has to be then. Sorry. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, he won the confidence of the chief rabbi and the lay leaders of the synagogue, and finally he was allowed to poke around in the Geniza. He could take with him whatever and as much as he liked.
So now he invested so much time in befriending the rabbi who just wanted to be an entertainer, and maybe after weeks, finally gets he can take anything he wants. So they ship everything. Now look, there are pieces of old paper here that have to be carefully. They're all cluttered together. But look at the top. Some is just garbage. And you can only see a few letters maybe on it. But everything was, and this they call this sacred trash later. There's a book actually called Sacred Trash, which is the story of the Cairo Geniza. And they bring it to the library of Cambridge University. This is the building. That used to be the library. Now it's, I hear it's um, a, a building with, for, how to say, administration. So that it's not there anymore, but that's where it was. And here's a picture of Solomon Schechter in the middle of boxes and boxes and boxes of the sacred trash, basically. And he's trying to go through it. This is a photo from 1898. Interesting. And there's like 140,000 fragments. He starts going one by them. Of course, way too much. Want to read?
Of course, the number of fragments is far too great to handle for Solomon Schechter alone, and later parts of the collection are distributed to other institutions to speed up the process.
Yeah, that helped. So a few people that are involved are Solomon Shalom Spiegel, and he was from the JTS, Jewish Theological Seminary. Well, this was later, obviously. This photo is from 1960, so. But it was divided in different places, so that's how it also got to the JTS to New York, and maybe that was part of the reason why Solomon Schechter got a relationship with JTS and ended up there. Yeah, and you have Shlomo Goitain. Um, Maybe you can read this one. I'm gonna
Sure.
read this one.
Shlomo Dov Goitam did much research on the Cairo Geniza documents. He gathered information on all aspects of the medieval life and wrote, among many other things, a six-volume work called A Mediterranean Society, the Jewish Community of the Arab World as Portrayed in the Documents of the Cairo Geniza. This includes information on how people made a living, on family life, life of the community, etc.
So there are documents on all kinds of stuff, not just on religion, but also on everything, on business and stuff. And he wrote this book. I just bought this last week. I got this in the mail. It's an excerpt of, it's a shorter version, basically, but instead of 6 volumes, it's in one. And so I'm looking forward to go through this. But yeah, it's quite something. And because of him, we have a whole, for instance, that whole thing about Yehuda Levi, who remember, who was involved in rescuing this girl who was to be sold as a slave on the slave market, and he got money from different communities and to ransom her. All these things about slavery and stuff in the Middle Ages. All these things we know from the Cairo Geniza. And then we have Professor Stefan Reif, who is still involved, wrote a number of books. He does research on the evolution of Jewish prayer. So people think that the Jewish prayer book is basically the same, but there's, as we spoke about, that he had Babylonian and Palestinian liturgy. That was very different, and there's a whole evolution of prayer. And in the Cairo Geniza, you find older forms and older stages of prayer, which is also quite interesting. Now we're going to I'm going to show you, and that's the rest of the class basically. But we're going to meet a lot of old friends that we saw in previous classes, and so we're going to go through a number of things, a number of examples of things that we found. Now, you see here on the right is an image. This is a sheet that is pretty in good state, right? Very good. It's not just falling apart. So some of the nicest pieces have been deciphered, and earlier they're now up to the small snips, but they still discover stuff all the time. So this is a page from the Bible with Babylonian vocalization. What does that mean? In Hebrew, you write only the letters. And much later, in the Middle Ages, people have come across, have designed a system to also write the vowels. A, E, I, O, U, right? Those vowels are written with signs above or below the letters. But different at that time when that was developed, there were different places where they did it in different way. So we now have a system from Tiberius, but in Babylonia they also came up with a system that didn't make it eventually. We're not using it anymore. But this is an example of Torah text with vowels, vocalization, in the Babylonian system, which is very interesting. We see that in Tiberius, and if you learn both of these systems, you can compare the pronunciation. That in Tiberius, there was a different the people pronounced some things differently from Babylonia. So, for instance, we know now that the Babylonians didn't have a difference between the e and the a. The short a, the patach, and the e, the sagol, was pronounced the same. There's only one sign for it, which is interesting because still the traditional Yemenite Jewish pronunciation of the Hebrew also doesn't distinguish between e and a. You can say for king is melech. They can say melech or malach. That's the same thing. It sounds the same, or it means the same thing. And that is based on, even though they don't use this signage, the Babylonians, but they pronounce it not unknowingly. When they found the Babylonian, they thought these Yemenites, they pronounce it so weird. They don't even have a difference between e and a. Pesach, it's it can be Pasach or Pesach. It doesn't matter. So, and now they found that it's really what their tradition didn't, even though it didn't match the vowels, it turns out when we found this, that it exactly matched the Babylonian vocalization. So that is already a very interesting thing. Okay, I hope you see that. Otherwise, it's boring if you don't. Okay, now here is another example. This is the last page of the oldest existing Talmud fragments. So we have Talmuds, later ones, earlier ones. This is the oldest of this fragment is the oldest that ever existed, and this is the last page. And it's actually dated 1,055 years after the destruction, meaning destruction of the temple. People didn't, in those days, nobody had the same, I'm not sure nobody, but it took a long, basically the year, the counting of the years in the Hebrew calendar is from the later Middle Ages, so, or Middle Ages. But initially people didn't count that way. So one of the counts was from the destruction of the temple, and that was more common for a long time. And here is so what was that? That's so basically it's from 1175 then, roughly. So that's very old, right? And so you can compare the Talmud, these older fragments, because the Talmud copies from copies from copies has gone through an evolution, and people have added it. It wasn't the same holy text as the Bible. So people have sometimes put things in between or taken things out. Sometimes names are confused of rabbis that are mentioned, and you can compare these old ones with the later ones and learn a great deal. Here is an old fragment of the Mishnah, and this is the oldest one that has paragraphs. Initially, the Mishnah was just written in one long text, but here you see in the middle this opening. This is for those who know is a gimel, and here it says Perek Hey, which means chapter 5. Here's chapter 4. Those are paragraphs. That was later added, so that was one of, if not the oldest text of the Mishnah that we have that has paragraphs. I'm not sure. Maybe the chapters were already there, but paragraphs, no. Here is a Talmud written in the form of a rotulus. Now, what's a rotulus? Rotulus is a scroll that you, but in Jewish services in the Torah, you have a scroll and you have how do you call it? You have a column and then you scroll in the next column, but this is different. It's on the side, and the whole scroll is one long column going from the beginning to the end. And so the whole Talmud is written on one long column continuously. So that's very unusual. Now, the only thing I'm reading more, but there's only sentences is the thing. But to get your attention, maybe I'll just let you read anyway. I don't know. Okay, let's do it. Let me see if Kevin is Kevin here by any chance? Okay.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, you're here. Just read this text if you don't mind.
A
Not
frag- a
Hebrew, just
frag-
the top line.
a fragment of the Jewish Talmud, Palestinian
Yeah, also called the Palestinian Talmud. It's an old fragment. It's a lesser studied Talmud. You have the Babylonian one is studied almost exclusively, but the Jerusalem Talmud, I guess, was maybe studied more often in those days. But this is one interesting to have it. Yeah.
A previously unknown version of the Babylonian Talmud.
Yeah, Tractate Shabbat.
Tractate.
Very good. So an unknown version. So there's different versions. Now everything is standardized in Jewish tradition. Look, the further we go in history, the longer things are used, the more standardized they become. So they say, all right, well, we'll use this. Everybody's using this version. But in those days, there were different versions. And this was a version that never knew before. For the real scholars, it would be very interesting to study. And once again, you'll learn about the evolution of the Talmud. What is this, Kevin?
A fragment from an Italian work on Jewish law called
Hilchot Gedolot.
Hilkot Gedolot.
Mhm.
The interesting thing is that it contains a quote from the Mishnah, but the core text is different from the Mishnah as we know it.
So it quotes the Mishnah, but the text doesn't occur in the Mishnah. That means they had a different version of the Mishnah. Now, we didn't find that different version of the Mishnah, but from the quote, we find that out. So that is also interesting. I'm starting with older things and going then to later. Now here, Karaites. Do you remember Karaites? Here is a book, a fragment from a book from Anan ben David, one of our first classes. And so that is cool. So that means that Karaites also used the Geniza, or that regular Rabbinite Jews might have had studied Anan ben David and said, well, it's also holy, let's also put it in the Geniza. So it's very interesting to find out that a lot of actually Karaite stuff ends up in the Geniza. Now here is an image of repairing, like a torn part of something that's written by Sa'adya Gaon. Right? What is Arabo-Hebrew? We have Judeo-Arabic, which is Judeo-Arabic is Hebrew written with Arabic. No, Judeo-Arabic is Arabic with Hebrew letters, but this is the opposite. This is Arabo-Hebrew. Read for me, Kevin, what that means.
Hebrew written with the Arabic letters during certain periods done by Karaites. Here is an excerpt from the book of Exodus, Shemot.
Yeah. So this is Hebrew Shemot in Arabic letters, and it says on top the Ele Shemot. It's interesting that the vowels are the Hebrew vowels, but the letters itself, the consonants, are Arabic. And I guess for many Karaites, they thought they did exactly the opposite. Isn't that interesting? It was easier for them. Maybe they a lot of Rabbinite Jews only learned. They started out with learning Hebrew, the Hebrew alphabet, and only later started learning Arabic. But I guess for Karaites it was maybe different. Yeah. All right. I find this very interesting. Okay. Now we go to what is this, Kevin?
A Jewish marriage contract for a mixed marriage between a Karaite bride and a Rabbinite groom. The groom promises not to force her to perform Rabbinite rituals, such as lighting fire for Shabbat.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so we have here, so that used to be common, that Karaites and Rabbinites would marry each other. And they even made a marriage contract. And marriage contracts are also not standardized. You could put in the marriage contract, we're going to see other examples, certain stipulations. So the Rabbinite groom says, I will not force you to light Shabbat candles because it's not your tradition. And I will just sit in the dark on Shabbat because I love you so much. Okay, so very interesting how that works. What is this?
Petition to Caliph
Al
al-Muntasir,
Muntasir, sorry, yeah.
written by a Jew in connection to a murder on a Nile boat.
Yeah, it's interesting because Agatha Christie wrote Death on the Nile, which is the same actually thing. But somebody was murdered on a Nile boat, and he's asking the caliphs to help solve the problem. And it's written, of course, in Arabic, but it's also interesting. This wouldn't be necessary to put in the Geniza, but as I said, there were things that ended up there anyway, which gives us even a better picture. Now, this is a prayer for the government. This will be your last one. We'll switch a little more frequently, Kevin, to other people.
Okay. And we pray for the life of our distinguished sovereign Lord and Muslim leader, commander of the faithful, and for the royal princess, and for all the royal family, and for those who devotedly assist the king, and for those who do battle for him against his foes. May Almighty God come to their assistance and to ours. Subdue those who arise against us and against them, and inspire them to deal kindly with us and with all his people, the house of Israel, and let us say amen.
Yeah, in Jewish liturgy, it's actually a tradition. It's a commandment to pray for the government that you live under. So outside of Israel, you live in America. So in 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 um, in many, at least Orthodox synagogues, traditional synagogues, there's some people might do a prayer for the state of Israel, but what is really a commandment is to pray for the government. So they pray for the president and the vice president and for the governor and the lieutenant governor and for the magistrate of the city, etc., etc. So here, this is an example of how they prayed for, actually call him the Muslim leader, not just the leader, our leader. Commander of the faithful is a typical Islamic title. Interesting. Good. I will. Thank you so much. Anaya is not here, I think. Rachel. Rachel, are you up for it? This is a fragment written by Benjamin of Tuleda. He came up probably in the book exams because he was a traveler and he wrote about all the Jewish community. He went through Italy, through Israel, even to. But so, what does he write about the community in Cairo? And we find this this also in the Geniza itself.
2 large synagogues are there, one belonging to the men of the land of Israel and one belonging to the men of the land of Babylon. The synagogue of the men of the land of Israel is called Knesset al
Shamiyin.
Smachain,
Shamiyin.
and the synagogue of the men of Babylon is called Knesset al Irakayin.
Rakiyin.
Irakiyin. Their usage with regard to the portions and sections of the law is not alike, for the men of Babylon are accustomed to read a portion every week, as is done in Spain, and is our custom, and to finish the law each year, whilst the men of Palestine do not do so, but divide each portion into 3 sections, and finish the law at the end of 3 years. The 2 communities, however, have an established custom to untie and pray together on the day of the rejoicing of the law and on the day of the giving of the law.
Yeah, so then they come together on certain times of the year to have a big celebration together, but otherwise they have a different schedule. And we saw this under Abraham Maimonides. We spoke about this, but this is another testimony of it. Now, this is the grace after meals, in Hebrew called Birkat Hamazon, according to the Palestinian Jewish tradition. And this is the whole text. So it's a lot shorter than many of you are maybe accustomed to. So it might be interesting to read this, Rachel.
Blessed art thou, Lord our God, King of the universe, eternal creator, maker of man, who prepares food for all his creatures, as it is written, you open your hand and satisfy all that lives with your favor. Blessed are you, Lord, who provides food for all.
Mm-hmm.
You create the land, you spread a table, you give us our portion, the Torah and the covenant. Therefore we thank you and bless your name, as it is written, you shall eat and be satisfied, and bless Lord your God for the good land which he has given you. Blessed are you, Lord, for the land and for our sustenance.
Uh-huh.
Rebuild your city, establish peace compassionately in our days. Establish your holy house and return to the kingship of your anointed one, the Messiah, speedily to its rightful place. For our eyes are focused on you, and build your holy city in our days, as is written, the Lord rebuilds Jerusalem, he gathers the exiles of Israel. There I will make the horn of David sprout. I have prepared a lamp for my anointed one. Blessed are you, Lord God, God of David, builder of Jerusalem. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, our Holy One, the Holy of Jacob, the King who is good and does good, who bestows good each day.
Yeah, so there the Birkat Hamazon, the grace after meal, has 4 blessings. You see, the 4th one is extremely short. And nowadays, the first 2 are also much longer, but they end with a text, right? The first one, you open your hand, so that this with your favor. And the second one, you shall eat and be satisfied. Okay, but now they also end the third one with a text in the Palestinian tradition. Actually, 2 texts, because the third blessing has 2 things. It has Jerusalem and it has David, which now it ends with B'nai Rachma Yerushalayim or B'nai Yerushalayim, and here it says Elohei David B'nai Yerushalayim. Very interesting if you know the regular one to compare it. Yes, Rachel. This.
A commentary by Sadio Gaon on the books of Isaiah with a small note written on it in Latin, perhaps by a crusader.
So also interesting that you have a note in Latin. It means it was in the hands of a crusader once. Maybe it was valuable. Maybe he captured it and then sold it, and then eventually, yeah. This is a trilingual text of the story of Joseph. Hebrew, Aramaic, and in Judeo-Arabic. And I don't think this is the Sa'adi Gaon version. I think this is another translation because they found other translations also. Okay, and this is from Sa'adi Gaon. The story, this is in Arabic with Hebrew letters, so that's why it's called Judeo-Arabic. The story of the Exodus. Now, Rachel, what is this?
A commentary on a section of the Talmud that deals with marriage.
What does the commentator say?
There is nothing that satisfies her more than you will listen to her.
Yeah, brilliant. To give such a wise and deep insight into a man with maybe marital problems, maybe you can try something new. Listen to her when she talks to you. Really cool. It's funny. All right. Now, this is very interesting. This is called a palimpsest. What is a palimpsest, Professor? I've never heard of a thing like that. Can you read this, Rachel? This becomes clear.
Paper or parchment was very expensive. That's why it was often reused. First, the ink would be scraped off, and then it would be written again. Such a manuscript is called a palimpsest. However, with the help of advanced technology, even the microscopic remnants of that scraped away text can be made visible again. The palimpsest, consists of 10th century Hebrew poetry written over a 6th century Greek Bible translation.
So yeah, Greek Bible translations were in the 6th century, by the way. Greek was still the main language in Alexandria. So there's a lot of the Jews in Egypt spoke Greek. Now Islam comes, nobody speaks Greek anymore. So in Alexandria, you had huge communities of people, of Hellenistic Jews, who actually they read the Torah in Greek. They prayed in Greek. Their whole service was in Greek. But that changed with the coming of Islam. So then nobody used it anymore. Instead of throwing it away, they scraped off the text and wrote Hebrew on top of it, could reuse it. And now we have two pieces of information. We have the Hebrew and we have the Greek. Very, very interesting. This is a poem by an old friend of ours and his wife, Mrs. Labrat, right? Remember? Okay. So we saw that Mrs. Labrat had written a poem to her husband. Here she writes a similar poem, and then he writes back. So an answer in the same poetry. Can you read this? This is really very sweet.
A poem by Janash ibn Labrat, his wife, and Janash's poetic answer to her. She. Will her beloved remember the graceful hind on the day of separation, her only son on her arm, on the day she took his mantle as a keepsake, and his keepsake he took her veil? He. But now shall I betray a clever woman like thee? Surely God bound us to the wife of our youth, and if my heart had plotted to abandon thee, I would have cut it out 1,000 pieces.
Oh, that's so sweet. He loves her. It's real love. Okay, I'll go to someone else. Thank you, Rachel. Alex is here? No?
Hello?
Hi, Alex. Long time no hear. Can you read something?
Yes. A letter by Yehuda Halevi describes...
Halevi, remember we had 2 classes on him. Yehuda Halevi is the name.
Describing his departure from Egypt to Israel in 1141.
Yeah, and if you know, of course, that was tragic because he had longed to go to Israel for many, many years, and as soon as almost he got there, he died, and we don't know how. But so that is a letter in his handwriting. Yeah.
A letter of recommendation written by Moses Maimonides from his friend Isaac al-Dari.
Yeah. So this is Maimonides' personal handwriting, and that's on the very bottom. You see his signature, and that signature is used very often because it became famous. This is based on this text, I believe. Here is Maimonides' first draft of Mishneh Torah, and if you look, you see all kind of corrections and scrapings and And if you see also, compare it to the Al-Dar'i letter of recommendation, this is clearer and more neatly. This is an official letter. This he wrote just for himself first, because it was a draft. See, but you see all the things that he wanted to put in the middle and incisions, so you can actually see a bit of the evolution of the Mishneh Torah, how he got to it and what he changed and what he first had written down. Fascinating, fascinating. What is this, Alex? You can call him Obadiah if you want, Obadiah in Hebrew, but in English it's called Obadiah.
Obadiah the Covenant was
Convert.
the convert was a Norman Italian Catholic priest who converted to Judaism in 1102. He wrote several letters to Maimonides with questions. He also composed music for the synagogue service with a fragment of which shown here.
Yeah, so there's actually with musical notes. I once found a little recording when people tried to do this. On the bottom, this is another thing on the bottom, which is a prayer book. And there he wrote, Obadiah Hagir, Ani Obadiah Hagir, I, Obadiah the Convert, Katav Beyado, have written it by hand. So he had copied his own prayer book, basically. But this is really nice, and it's so interesting to this would be medieval music. Isn't that cool? We don't have anything like that. Yeah, this is
literatical text written on recycled legal contracts.
Yeah, so you can see what's below and then you see what's on it, but it's a liturgical text with recycled. And what is this?
A fragment of a Passover Haggadah.
Yeah, we know what the Haggadah is because of the blood libel stuff, and cute, funny letters in the shape of people. And we want to know what this is.
A Hebrew translation of a book by the Arabic philosopher Avicenna on medicine, translated in 1441 by Joseph Lorquy.
Yeah, Lorquy, very good. So yeah, also interesting, right? It's basically Arabic philosophy in Hebrew translation. Now this is a Arabic translation, but in Hebrew letters of Aristotle. Now this is funny.
Religious Tourism, a 15th century travel guide with locations of burial sites of holy people.
This is not the Maimonides, the Maimonides tour operation, because this is you go to the Holy Land, and this is a whole guide. It's all about which graves you can visit to pray because of holy people are there. Yeah, so and you see the red letters are the names of the town, and then you see in the smaller black letters who's buried there, basically. Yeah, so yeah, anti-Maimonidean tourist enterprise. Yes, Alex.
Tuvai bin Ali promised his bride to promises his bride to behave and not to go drinking with the boys.
Yeah, so he's writing a letter here that he's proposing, and she says, but I have conditions. You haven't always behaved well. This is a whole long letter that I will behave, and I will yeah. So she was probably, and so this is part of the text. This will be your last slide, Alex. So that's very, very funny. I think it's interesting because it gives us really it's a life thing. Yeah.
I shall I shall behave towards her in a way that fine Jews behave towards their decent wives. I shall associate with good men and not with corrupt ones. I shall bring home
Shall not bring home.
I shall not bring home littlest individuals, buffoons, frivolous men, and good-for-nothings. I shall not enter the home of anyone attracted to littlest behavior,
Licentious.
licentious behavior, to corruption, and to revolting activities. I shall not associate with them in eating, drinking, or any other activity. I shall not purchase a slave girl for myself, as long as this fa-
Faiza.
Faiza
Mhm.
is my wife, unless she explicitly consents. I shall not leave Futsa, Egypt, to travel abroad unless she specifically agrees.
So he even doesn't go on a trip unless he gets permission from his wife. So he's really, um, and also, this is like, he's such a good boy. I shall not purchase a slave girl for myself. And so that's what rich people would do. They would basically a young sex slave. I mean, it's amazing. This is just part of this, pops out of this thing, and how people owns people. And, I mean, this is, and that was normal in those days. You see it all over. This is an interesting aspect of the society that pops out of you, uh, out of the text in almost as a side note in the Cairo Geniza. Such interesting insights we get from this society. Now here are thanks, Alex. I'll go to someone else. Cassandra, you're here, right, Cassandra?
Hi.
Hey, so nice to hear you. Hi, Cassandra. We'll go to the next slide. There's a bunch of just quotes from different manuscripts, and just we do them one by one.
Okay. I promise my future wife that I shall walk the straight and narrow and avoid the company of rotten people.
Yeah, these are probably proposals, but you didn't propose to the bride, you proposed to the parents, so they're gonna have to say, well, I will behave so well. Yeah.
God knows prices are so unpredictable these days.
Yeah. So also interesting. Mm-hmm.
Trying to leave without paying your tax, you'd better come along with me, sir.
Yeah.
The man is useless. I've been a frustrated woman for months now. Let's separate.
Yeah. So she's writing a letter to, I don't know who, to the court. It says, I'm a frustrated woman. He doesn't fulfill me sexually, so I want to. The man is useless. I want a divorce. Yeah.
Please don't spank my child for being late. His homework delayed him.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't understand his own sermons. He is an ignoramus, repeating things like a parrot.
Yeah. This rabbi, he doesn't understand his own sermons. That is so funny. Gosh, I don't know if you find it as funny as I do, but just you find these from the Middle Ages, deep Middle Ages. You get these so human. All right, what is this?
A marriage document that includes a stipulation that the bride may demand a divorce if she no longer cares for her husband.
Yeah, that's in as I said, in Jewish law, gradually things have standardized more and more. Now most people use a standardized contract, which is actually ridiculous, to be honest, because it actually says my price, my dowry price is so many, so many, this and this amount, and not only that, I'm giving giving an extra amount on top of it. That's always what it says. But if you look what the amount is, it's just only a few dollars, what it's worth. So it's ridiculous because it's standardized. We don't want to change it anymore. In those days, you could negotiate. You could. I've seen actually a marriage contract where things were actually negotiated and put in, and but you can actually, as a woman, can demand. I only want to marry you if I have the freedom to to um, to get a divorce. I can initiate a divorce, and you have to give it to me, and that's part of the marriage contract. And because you agree on this willingly, then you're obligated. That's not called forced because you actually signed this yourself, right? So that's very interesting, very interesting, and I think it would be a good idea in many cases. Here, maybe read this. This is a letter, I believe. Mhm.
My greetings abound. May God's help soon be found by the Jews all around. To my worthy and modest wife, I am aware of your admirable behavior, and there is no need for me to dwell on this here. In contrast to your own happy position, I am thoroughly miserable and miss you all, particularly the eyes of my beloved young son, whom I adore and cherish. In tears and anguish, I look for consolation at every corner, day and night, but I expect none other than from God. I know that there is no need for me to lay down the law, but do please think of your religious duties and conduct yourself in a way that brings you honor. Take every care of our dear beloved child and spare no effort on his behalf. This will be a sure sign of your love. Do not worry at all about me. If only I could catch a swift cloud, I would return in record time. But with God's help, I shall finish my business and come home quickly, with a pocket that is less than full, but with a happy heart.
Yeah, so he is clearly homesick and he loves his wife and he loves his son. But it's interesting, he says, I'm so miserable. And then he says later, do not worry at all about me. But it's very nice to find a letter like that, I think. Okay, so let's go to I'll give you one more, Cassandra.
In a case brought before the rabbinic court of David Maimonides, the son of Abraham Maimonides, a woman agreed that her future husband retains the right to have other wives beside her. She felt obligated to him for having rescued her from her Arab captors by paying a ransom, and she was obviously aware that her bargaining position had been weakened by the fact that they had raped her, together with a number of other Jewish women during their captivity.
Yeah, that's another part, sad part, right? These things happened, and I guess she was damaged goods, as they say. It's so sad. Not that this, but yeah, that's life. I mean, if he was really, and people had different wives, and normally, if you come from a good family, and then or you're a desirable bride, you could say, okay, I'll put in the marriage contract, no other wives. I believe that the Syrians still put that in, technically, standards, of course, that the groom um promises not to have any additional wives. So Ashkenazim have a law not to do that, to against it. But in theory, the Sephardim don't. They never had a law against polygamy, but in this case, by the Syrians at least, of course, the Sephardim have to abide by the national law, the law of the land, which forbids it. So that already takes care of it. But in Syria, I guess it was allowed according to the local law, but they put a standard in not to do this. But in this case, there was no standard thing. It was all in flux, and this is a very sad thing. So in order to be married and to have a life, she conceded to this. It's just, yeah. This is a very, go to someone else. Thanks, Cassandra. I'll go to Brittany, if that's okay. Brittany?
Yeah, sorry, trying to get my camera, my microphone to work.
Okay, sorry. That's okay. I'll hear you, and I see your photo, which is very nice also.
Thank
Now,
you.
another thing has to do with marriage. This is the last one about marriage, I believe, but very dramatic.
In another case, a husband gave his very attractive wife a conditional divorce that could be activated if he failed to return from a trip
So-
abroad.
Yeah, that happens, and that used to happen. That people gave you go on a long trip. Now, maybe on a ship, sometimes people disappear. So, and then if you don't have a divorce, the wife could not get married because maybe the husband would show up, and we don't know if he perished or if he's there. Maybe she's waiting for 5 years. When can she get married again? Maybe all of a sudden the husband shows up again. So. But what people would do sometimes give a conditional. So if I don't show up in a year or whatever, then you, even if I'm alive or not, that's then in a year you can. This is a divorce that will be activated, and then you can get married. So he to someone else. So that happened here.
After his lengthy absence, she took advantage of the stipulation and married another husband with more opportunity to stay at home. When the first husband heard of this, he returned home, and in the violent confrontation that followed, both the men and women met their deaths.
Yeah. So he comes home and what? She's remarried, but I'm back here. Yeah, but you didn't show up. What? And then they it's my wife. No, I married her. They fight, they kill each other, and the wife is dead. Or maybe he killed the wife first in anger, and then the other person, and then he's so guilty that he kills himself. I don't know what happened, but it's definitely very traumatic. Okay. Now, this is something different. This is a teaching tool for children. So they made it attractive with a little menorah here. And this is Aleph with all letters Alephs with different vowels underneath to learn. And here the different letters, Bet and Gimel, probably went through the whole alphabet. And here's another one. Yeah. What do you read? What can we learn from this, Brittany?
You want me to read?
Yes, yes.
I have to inform you, sir, that I have not been successful in educating this boy, Abu Mansur. Perhaps you can help me with this. Whenever I spank him, I do so excessively, but as soon as I begin, the school mistress rushes along and, after having smacked him 4 or 5 times, releases him. Had it not been for his illness, I would have killed him with beating, although as a poorly clothed newcomer, he is entitled to some consideration. He is impervious to argument and not at all quiet. As soon as he comes in, he starts fighting with his sister and cursing her incessantly, especially if I am not present. Perhaps you could threaten him with a little spanking and tell him to be reasonable, well behaved, and quiet. Whatever you decide, don't do anything which might anger your mother and father.
Yeah, spanking was normal up till when I was young, there were still teachers who would pull children's ears and stuff like that. That's way before it, but that's been a long-standing tradition. Here's scribbles of a young child. He had to practice the alphabet, alphabet, the alphabet, and then he was bored and he started doing this. Also funny. I don't know, maybe got punished because as we know, this material was very expensive, so he could have used it for something else. But who knows? Yeah, continue.
I now ask your Excellency to kindly order them to pay me their fees so that I should have something to spend for the holidays. I might perhaps like to taste a piece of meat, for I have not bought meat more than 8 times for the last year, Shavuot, for the Shavuot. God knows that I would not have mentioned this to my lord had I not known my lord does not tolerate such a state of affairs.
Right. Okay. So for a whole year, he only had meat 8 times, which in those days people ate a lot of meat. There were no vegetarians, so that was really a sign of poverty. This is a text that was made to hang on your bookcase, and it's a praise of knowledge in a poem. That's nice. And sometimes even Arabic texts. So this is a text from a fairy tale called Kalila Dimna. And it's very beautifully illustrated, as you see. So that is very fun. And what else? Here we have a letter in Yiddish, even from a mother who lived in Jerusalem to her son who was in Cairo. This is a guilt trip letter from a truly Jewish mother. You want to read this one, Brittany?
Sure. Know as it pleases you that Esther got married. May you marry your sons with greater advantage. May they never be orphans and
meaning greater advantage. It wasn't a good deal. It didn't get a big dowry. May you, continue.
May they never be orphans, and more tears flowed from my eyes than from a fountain, for I found myself with no other support than the Lord, blessed be he, and your brother-in-law who did come. But you did not send me even 2 lines with him. Even if he did not call on you, you could have sent 2 lines for us with those who come and go. You could have done so, not for me, but for your sister, who's saying, "Oh, to receive 2 lines from my brother," is tearing out her heart and does nothing but cry from your lack of affection.
Yeah, you don't write us. Yeah, it's innocent. Anything with when your brother-in-law came from Cairo to us. and you forget about this, and your sister is married and she's crying her eyes out because you forgot her. So that's fun. Okay, we'll do one more.
This is to inform you, my lady, dear sister, may God accept me as a ransom for you, that I have become seriously ill with little hope of my recovery, and I have dreams indicating that my end is near. My lady, my most urgent request of you, if God, the exalted, indeed decrees my death, is that you take care of my little daughter and make efforts to give her an education, although I know well that I'm asking you for something unreasonable, as there is not enough money by my father for support, let alone my formal instruction. However, she is a model and our saintly mother, my lady. Only God knows how I wrote these lines.
Extremely sad. This woman is dying, has no support. She's just a single mother. Her husband probably died, and she has a daughter. She doesn't know how to take care of the daughter when she's dead, so she's asking somebody else to do that. And please send her to school, but it's probably not happening if she doesn't have money to left behind. But that's extremely sad, right? Um, Lovely. Okay, thank you. Imoni?
Yes, I'm here.
Hey, Imoni. Hey. So people used to think that when there's a thunder, it means something. A thunder is an omen of something. So I don't know if you want to read this. It might be interesting.
In the month of Shavat, if it thunders in the sign of Aquarius, there will be war against a nation living next to the sea. If it thunders in Pisces, those coughing up phlegm will fall down in the nation. If it thunders in Aries, the vines and all the trees will improve their fruits. If it thunders in Taurus, the trees will die from the land. If it thunders in Gemini or in Cancer or in Leo, the same will occur. If it thunders in Virgo or in Libra, there nothing unusual will happen.
Sorry, yeah.
If it thunders in Scorpio, the kings will rise up over the land, and one of them will die in war. If it thunders in Sagittarius or in Capricorn or in Aquarius or in Pisces, a great king will die, and there will be a great calamity in the land. And if it thunders in Aries, nothing unusual will happen.
Yeah. Okay. And then it continues with all these omens. Okay, this is like get to more superstitious maybe or magic. Has a purification ritual. It has a prayer for gaining power by using certain names of God, and it's a protective amulet with names for protection. Okay, here's an amulet with biblical verses that they found. Here's a curse of death. This is the very last slide, actually. Maybe you want to read this. Read it carefully because it might be dangerous.
Okay. A curse of death. Take a plate of lead and write on it in the first hour of the day. Bury it in a new grave which is 3 days old. Then certain angels are addressed by their Hebrew names: anger, wrath, rage, fury, and destroyer, and characterized as those who are appointed to destroy all mankind. Destroy the life of N, son of N, from this world, and do not delay it, i.e. his death, not even for a moment, in the name of Gehuder,
Yahweh of hosts. It's all magical names.
who has created the world in his wisdom and completed the earth in his thoughtfulness and created the first man from dust. Let him return to dust. He shall give you the permission to destroy N, daughter of N. The death of N, son of N.
N just means name, so you can fill out somebody that you hate. You put I want this guy dead, so you put in his name basically. Or her.
Okay. Shall be in this very hour and in this very moment. Amen, amen, Salah. After this Aramaic Hebrew text, we find the remark in Arabic that this curse is very useful and effective for causing death.
Yeah, useful for killing. It's actually what it means.
This
effective,
text,
probably, yeah.
This text is one of many magical texts which ended up in the Cairo Geniza. It can be categorized as a magical recipe for eliminating the existence of a certain person. The name of this person is not mentioned, but only the phrase N, son/daughter of N. In other words, the text is a form to be activated by adding the names of the person intended.
Yeah, isn't that something, huh? well, it's very problematic to do these things, of course. I mean, but especially if you believe in it, it's even worse. You know, if you don't believe in it, it's bad too. But so yeah, this is our last slide. Here is Solomon Schechter looking through the Geniza. So now you know about the Cairo Geniza. Our time is perfect. It's exactly 1 minute to 11. And this was another class. I'm going to make it to a video and edit it. And then we're going to meet again next week on Monday. And really, the course is coming to an end. Thanks a lot, everyone. Bye-bye.